In my latest video, I tested a mesh base layer, and I actually found out that they work better than traditional base layers. In this video, I'm testing something even more interesting, an updated layering system which consists of an elemental mesh layer that's worn underneath a more typical base layer. But what makes it really interesting is that the elemental mesh layer is water repellent. I know what you're thinking. A base layer should be the opposite of water repellent, right? Well, yeah, that's correct, but an elemental layer is not a base layer. Now let me explain that a bit more in detail. This layering system was developed by Finetrack. They're a high-quality, local Japanese hiking gear manufacturer, and they've only recently started to expand globally. This video is sponsored by them, but I'm really interested in this topic myself, and I saw a lot of people online recommending them, so the timing couldn't have been better. When you're active, for example, when hiking a steep section of a trail, you usually sweat a lot. A traditional base layer, whether it's made from a synthetic material or merino wool, soaks up all of the sweat and then stays wet on your skin. If it's below freezing or just above it like it is right now, this drops down your body temperature significantly. The key idea behind the Finetrack Elemental layer is that you're always supposed to wear it underneath a traditional base layer. Because it's made from a fine mesh, whenever you start sweating, most of the sweat is able to escape to the outer layer without accumulating in the layer that's touching your skin. The problem with other mesh layers is that once you develop a good amount of sweat, the fabric still gets wet. With the Finetrack Elemental layer, this problem is minimized because it's made from a water-repellent fabric. This allows most of the sweat to pass right through the fabric and is being soaked up by the outer base layer. This means that the fabric that's touching your skin from the Elemental layer is almost always dry, even when you're doing something really active like climbing a steep hill or trail running. Now, of course, I could keep trying to explain how it works in theory, but I think a better idea would be to show how it works in real life with some tests. The first thing that I want to show you is how water repellent the Finetrack Elemental layer is. When I pour some water on a typical synthetic base layer, the fabric pretty much instantly soaks it all up. But when we introduce another layer on top, the Finetrack Elemental layer, you'll see that the water droplets pretty much stay straight on the fabric without soaking in. In reality though, the vapor coming from your sweat is much finer than these water droplets, so they'll just go straight through the elemental layer and out to the outer base layer. If I shake it slightly, you'll see that the water falls through the elemental layer and becomes absorbed by the blue base layer underneath, while the elemental layer still feels dry to the touch. And for the second test, I'll climb up that hill 2 times to see how well it works in real life. On the first ascent, I'll be wearing a normal synthetic base layer and a 10-kilogram backpack. On the second ascent, I'll switch to the Finetrack layering system. When I reach the top, I'll compare how sweaty I am wearing either one of these layering systems. I'll put on a fleece, start a timer, sit down, and then wait until I become cold. Theoretically, I should be able to stay warm longer with the Finetrack layering system because I will be less sweaty, but who knows, we'll see. Alright, so I've put on the first traditional synthetic base layer and on top another sun hoodie, and I'm ready to start the first test. And in total it should be about 400 meters of elevation gain, so I'm sure I'll be sweating a lot by the time that I reach the top. Alright, so I reached the top and started the timer. And now let's quickly check how sweaty I am. The back on the outer layer feels pretty sweaty. The armpits, not so much, at least in the sun hoodie. Let's take off the sun hoodie. Okay, the armpits are definitely sweaty. Oh, the back is extremely sweaty right now. Now let's put on a fleece, a hat, and gloves. And let's wait until I become cold. Roughly 15 minutes have passed and I'm only now starting to feel the first shivering. 21.5 minutes have now passed and I'm now definitely starting to feel cold, and I would definitely love to put on my down jacket, but I'm not going to do that And I'm going to wait a bit more until I reach the point where I start to shiver quite frequently. 26 minutes and 15 seconds have passed, and I'm stopping the timer now because I'm starting to get some pretty constant shivers, and I would say that right now I'm starting to feel pretty cold. I also keep checking how wet the base layer is, and on the back and in the armpits it's definitely drier, but it's still a bit damp after 26 minutes. All right, now it's time for me to dress up, head back down, switch to the Finetrack layering system, and then repeat the same test. I've switched to the Finetrack layering system, which I'm wearing underneath the same sun hoodie, which is now dry. I've eaten a bit, I've rested, I've rehydrated, and now I'm ready to climb up that hill for the second time. Just reached the top for the second time, started the timer, and now let's check the sweat situation. Again, the armpits feel a bit damp. The back feels extremely wet this time. Now for the Finetrack base layer, again the armpits a bit damp. The back feels very sweaty. Let's take it off. The armpits a bit damp, and the back only seems to be a bit damp. So I would say that this base layer is definitely working. But now let's put everything back on. The base layer, the fleece, the hat and gloves, and let's wait until I become cold. 10 minutes and 30 seconds so far. I'm still pretty warm, I would say. And one thing that I did notice is that I keep checking my back to see if the base layer and the elemental layer are dry or not. And it seems that the elemental layer is almost completely dry now, and the base layer also seems to be pretty dry. It's still a bit damp, but yeah, they're just drying much quicker compared to the other base layer that I was using. 17 minutes in, and I am starting to feel the first shivers, but I'm definitely not cold yet. 32 minutes and 20 seconds have passed, and I'm stopping the timer because I am starting to shiver quite a lot. So let me put on my jacket, go out in the sun, and let's go over the results. After reaching the top the first time with the normal synthetic base layer, I noticed that most of the sweat was absorbed by the synthetic base layer, and the sun hoodie that I was wearing on top was only slightly damp. But when I reached the top for the second time with the Finetrack layering system underneath the same sun hoodie, I noticed that the sun hoodie was pretty much drenched in the back where my backpack was. The blue Finetrack base layer was also slightly wet, and the elemental layer that I was wearing underneath it all was only slightly damp. So to sum up, the traditional base layer was good at absorbing all the sweat and keeping it inside it next to my skin, whereas the Finetrack system did a very good job at moving the sweat away from the inner layers and out to the outer layers. The second thing that I want to talk about is the drying times. With the normal synthetic base layer, it became almost dry to the touch after maybe 20-25 minutes. Whereas with the Finetrack system, the elemental layer was almost completely dry after just 6 or 7 minutes. So realistically, if it does get wet, it dries out roughly 3 times as quickly as a normal base layer. And the third thing is the warmth. With the Finetrack system, I became cold after 32 minutes and 20 seconds. But with a normal synthetic base layer, I became cold after just 26 minutes and 15 seconds. So the fact that my skin wasn't touching a damp or wet layer, I think definitely helped with keeping me warm. Other than doing these tests, I also wanted to talk about how well made both of these Finetrack layers feel. The elemental layer is made from a super fine thread, and it feels very comfortable on your skin. And even though it is a mesh layer, it has very small gaps. So when you're wearing it from a distance, it looks almost like a regular shirt instead of a fishnet. And this definitely is a plus, because I saw that a lot of you guys don't like how a fishnet base layer looks. The blue base layer is also made from a very fine fabric, but it isn't as stretchy. Overall, it feels very durable, and it feels like it's going to last a very long time. And the stitching does look very high-end and very detailed. In addition to performing this test, I also went on a 15-kilometer hike with this layering layering system, I did some trail running, and I wore it around the house. And it really does keep me dry and warm. And I think it's especially useful for very high intensity activities. For example, if you're trekking in the mountains, if you're trail running, mountain biking, climbing, and so on. Especially if you're doing it in winter when the temperature is below freezing or just above it. I've linked out to the Finetrack websites down in the video description. If you're interested, make sure to check them out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!